Good morning. Today is Sunday, December 27th, 2020. Last week I shared with you an insight into a deeper meaning of the Shma. Shma Yisroel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The idea of covering our eyes when we say the Shma. That came from an analysis of a verse in last week's pasuk. And I mentioned to you that there's another lesson about the deeper meaning of the Shema that comes from this week's parsha, and I'd like to share that with you. This week's parsha, the parsha Vayechi, describes the scene at the end of Yaakov's life with all of his children gathered around him. And our rabbis explain that Yaakov is worried by what he sees. Because Yaakov had been born in Israel, he had been raised and he lived in Israel, the old country, with his grandfather Avraham, with his parents Yitzchak and Rivka. His children and grandchildren lived in enlightened, sophisticated Egypt. They looked different. They dressed differently. They spoke differently. They spoke a different language. He worried that his offspring had strayed from faith and tradition. He worried that they were no longer committed to the ideals and the values that he had taught them based on serving one God. And his children perceived his discomfort at looking at all of them surrounding him just before he passed away. And so his children cried out to their father, and they said to him, Shema Yisroel, listen Israel. Israel is the name for Yaakov, like it is the name for the entire Jewish people. And they said to him, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, the God that we follow, Hashem Echad, it's one God. It's the same God that you follow. Though we may be a new generation, living in a new place, though we may look differently and speak with a different idiom, but we affirm and live by the same truth that you taught us and that you live by. Now those words, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, they were later written down in the Torah in the parsha of Ve'eschanan, in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. But our rabbis tell us the words were actually first spoken here by the sons of Yaakov, the children of Yaakov. And they said to him, we accept the responsibility to serve your God, our God, one God. And they said to him, we will also transmit that belief and that service to our children, just as you have transmitted it to us. And when Yaakov heard those words from his children, he was greatly relieved. And he was grateful to God for preserving his family and for preserving his heritage such that it could be transmitted down the generations, continuing onward. And Yaakov responded to their words, and he said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Leolam Voed. Blessed is the name of the glory of God forever and ever. The future is assured. Judaism, my values, what I learned and I have taught to my children will flourish forever. The Talmud says that Yaakov said the words, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Li'olam Va'ed out loud. However, when Moshe wrote down the words that God told him to write later in the Torah, in the book of Dvarim, the Parsha of Eschanan, Moshe did not write those words. So the Talmud says, well, we can't say the words if Moshe did not write them. We can't omit the words if Yaakov did say them. And that's why we say them quietly. We say Shma Yisroel out loud, and then we say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Li'olam Va'ed. We say that silently, quietly, to recognize that those were the words spoken by Yaakov. And when we say those words softly, we say them and we thank God now, today, for ensuring again, on an ongoing basis, the ongoing flourishing of your holy Jewish people, God, your beloved people. And even though our children may have a different idiom than we have, they may have a different way of communicating than we have, they may have a different appearance, they have different experiences. But underlying all of the superficial differences between us and our children is the faithfulness to the same truth of Yaakov. The same dialogue takes place in every generation. And that means that parents confront their children. Parents should have expectations. If not in appearance, at least in the fundamentals. Parents should be considered. Do my children affirm the basic fundamentals of belief in God that I affirmed to my parents going back to Yaakov? And children need to respond. Children need to take it seriously. Children have an obligation to reassure us, their parents and their grandparents, yes, though we may differ in externals, but the fundamentals are the same. Rav Soloveitchik, a blessed memory, the Rav, asked the following question. He asked, it's somewhat strange that in our prayers, let's say if I'm davening in the morning, I say the line Shma Yisroel out loud, and then I say the line Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso softly. But I'm saying both of the lines. Asks the Rav, that sounds a little strange because it was a dialogue. Remember, the sons of Yaakov said the line Shema Yisrael, and Yaakov responded, Baruch Shem. Maybe, for example, let's say you're in shul. Maybe the congregation should say the line of Shema Yisrael out loud, and maybe the chazan should respond and say, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso. How can all of us say both lines when they are lines originally recited by two different parties? And the Rav says with a very, very important insight. Every single person, every single Jew, is both a parent and a child, both a giver and a recipient, one who transmits the values and teachings of Torah to the next generation, and one who has received that from parents and from teachers and other role models. We are both sides of the conversation. Rav Soloveitchik says these words, the reading of Shema is a dialogue between the ages, the continual restaging of the historic meeting of Yaakov and his sons, pregnant with paradoxical destiny, full of import. And every one of us represents both sides of the dialogue. When we say the words of Shma aloud, and then Baruch Shem quietly, we should say it maybe a little slower than we're used to, in order to reflect on our role in both sides of this dialogue. My friends, I want to wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.